Welcome everybody. This is a webinar series on Azure Data Studio notebooks. So far, I think the third webinar, the second one on notebooks. This one is all about sharing notebooks. So built into Azure Data Studio is the capability to collaborate with others, share your work, post to GitHub, and it does give you a lot of avenues to share what would normally perhaps be just work that's in SQL Server Management Studio. More difficult to share, certainly more difficult to annotate, document, add links, images, etc. So we're really very excited about notebooks, and so we're going to get into using notebooks and ultimately how to share your notebooks. If you have a question, feel free to post that. We have a couple of panelists who will monitor that, since I'm going to get going and probably won't see that window, but we'll let somebody interrupt me if needed. We actually, instead of using PowerPoint, we're using notebooks for the presentation, because everything that you would want is in. We don't have to go back and forth between PowerPoint and Management Studio or some other program. In fact, Azure Data Studio is designed where it's a one-stop shop. Even if you need to get to a command line prompt, PowerShell, all kinds of things are available right within the covers of Azure Data Studio. So we're going to go in that spirit, simply use Azure Data Studio. So the topics we're going to cover today are going to be how to use links and images within your notebooks, how to combine multiple notebooks into a Jupyter book, how to integrate this with GitHub, and time permitting. Now we're going to run for half an hour. We'll go to 2:30 Eastern time. If we have time, we're going to get into notebook variables, because there's some interesting things going on with that. So let me get going, and hopefully we can cover that content as well. So links in notebooks, they can be internal or external to notebooks. So I have an example up here of a link to the GitHub site for this webinar. Everything that you see today is in this GitHub site, so you can download it. You can use Azure Data Studio and GitHub to clone it, and then just work with it locally. You can zip it up and then unzip it and use it that way as well. And then you can also have links internal. So this notebook lives in a folder. I can give you the brief outline of the folder. If we look at tree command, you can see the outline of this. Wherever you see IPVY, that is a notebook. So you're going to see both images, notebooks, and even Markdown within this folder. And so this is simply a link to another notebook within this same folder. You can see the same thing from Azure Data Studio. If you look at the activity bar, you can see all the very same contents. It's not rendered quite the same as this, so it's a little easier to read with the tree command. However, it is all the same content. If we look at the Markdown, and if you were part of webinar 02, we went into the different kinds of cells, Markdown and code being the two primary types of cell. I'm just going to double click on this Markdown, and now you can see it's a split screen where on the right side it's rendered, on the left side is the actual code. Markdown is a lot like HTML, only very, very easy to use. So here is the link to the GitHub site. And the format, if you need some help on that, is very simple. And in fact, there is a link syntax helper. And within the link, in the brackets, you put in the description, which could be my link. And then inside the parentheses would be HTTP. If it's external, or if it's internal, it can simply be the name of the file, which in this case is another notebook, but it could be a README file, could be really anything you would link to that would render within Azure Data Studio. So to try this, I'll go ahead and go back to the original. This is our external link, and this now takes us to GitHub. So this would be an external link. And again, this is where you can, and you'll get an email with this, but this is where you can get a copy of everything that you're seeing today. But you can also have an internal link. And so this internal link is pointing to the Markdown cheat sheet. This was a part of what we had shown during the last webinar. If I click on that, that now takes us over to another notebook Markdown cheat sheet. So you got internal and you can have external links. Now, ideally, you would want this to work both in Azure Data Studio and on GitHub, because what we're going to do, actually we were there just a minute ago, but what you want to be able to view this notebook in the very same way on GitHub that you can inside of Azure Data Studio. Because of that, images are a little bit quirky. And what I've found is it's best to put the results for images within the very same folder location as the referencing file, which in this case would be a notebook or a Markdown file. And we have a couple of images here. So we'll take a look at that, just double click. And now you can see the syntax for an image. This is our BITrax logo. You can see the syntax is exactly the same. The only difference is there is this exclamation mark at first, which tells us it's an image. And then outside of that, it simply references the name of the image file, which you can see is small logo.png, which happens to be right here. Or another one, Azure Data Studio, small.png. And again, that would be right there. So even though it sort of clutters the folder, because you have other options for rendering the content, this one is one of two primary ones that are active on the activity bar. This is a file view, which is the same as the tree view, just a little bit smushed together. But this activity bar is your notebook. And notice now it's a very clean representation of your notebooks without the additional files. So because of that, you can primarily, if you're working with notebooks, work using this view. And that way you wouldn't have the problem with the cluttering of too many files within the same folder. Some people like to put it in a separate like resources folder. And you can do that, and that works in Azure Data Studio, but when you post it to GitHub, you lose those images. At least I can't figure out how to maintain those images. So how does this look in Azure or in GitHub? Let's go ahead and we'll follow that same link. Now we're in the identical version of this within GitHub. So I can go into the content. And now I didn't actually, we started here in the webinar outline. So I'll go there and you can see it's in the process now of rendering it in the very same way that it was rendered in Azure Data Studio. A couple of things are different here. Images are in the center instead of aligned to the left. And of course, it's a notebook. So the Markdown works fine, but if we had a code cell in here, actual SQL, Python, PowerShell, et cetera, you couldn't run it here, but you could see it. But this is still a nice way for somebody to get a feel for the overall Jupyter Notebook site or project, if you will, that is consistent with what you have in Azure Data Studio. So that if we look at the welcome link, you can see that we have now a Markdown page, and this Markdown page is giving us the outline that you saw a minute ago on the website or on the GitHub site. So the two are rendered fairly consistently. This is a Markdown page. Markdown does align the images to the left. It's the it is the notebooks that center the images. Okay, so let's go back to our outline. So again, for best results, just put your images in the same location as your notebook, and then it'll render just fine either in Azure Data Studio or in GitHub. All right, let's talk about Jupyter Books a little bit. Jupyter Books are notebooks that are bound together and usually complemented by Markdown files and also YAML files. If I look at to kind of set the stage for this, you could think of each notebook representing a chapter in a book. Now, it may or it may not, but it's a good way to think of it. You could think of a notebook as a section of a book. If it's big chapters, you could break it into multiple notebooks. But it's just a way to divide the content of a book where you don't want it all in a single, very large notebook. Now, from Azure Data Studio's perspective, there are 3 different ways to look at the content. And we've already done 2 of these. So the folder contents, which are listed here or in the tree view. The sidebar view, which is more convenient because it will, in this case, only show you your Markdown as well as your notebooks. But you could also create your own README files. And that's what this README is right here. And the README is also giving you an outline. Now, it doesn't have to be exactly the same. And if you look at this fairly closely, what you'll see is we've got 5 here, but 6 in the Markdown, in the README.markdown file. So you have a little bit more liberty within your README file to perhaps include additional content that maybe you don't want to call out in the primary navigation, or instead of just giving the name of the notebook, you want to give a description or some additional detail. So the README file gives you a nice way to add content that isn't available through the other 2 views, again, the file view or the notebook view. And you can have multiple README files if you like. Okay, so 3 ways to view the contents. There's also 3 kinds of files that are involved. We've already talked about 2 of them. Notebooks, of course, this is the core. The README files, which is a nice way to annotate, to provide images, better descriptions. And then finally, YAML files. And YAML files are really the glue for what you see rendered in this sidebar. It's a table of contents. You can see this is a table of contents. There really is only one to worry about, one YAML file, and that will give you this particular outline. So these are the 3 types of files that are used in Azure Data Studio from a notebook view to tie this together, which will probably be the primary way that your users would understand your content, is by going through this particular view. They could, of course, look at this and say, oh, well, what's this file, that file? But here's really the power of your presentation along with the README file, which is here. Well, how does that all tie together? Very simply, if you look at toc.yaml, that is your a table of contents. The table of contents is going to give you the sections, and the sections are what are appearing here. So you could have like that one notebook, which was a cheat sheet, that's in the file system, but it's not listed in your table of contents, therefore it doesn't appear here, right? So that's one option. This will also determine the order of your files. So the order of your files in the directory view is simply alphabetical, but here it's relying on your table of contents. And the table of contents, of course, it's located right here. It's under the folder _data TOC. There's one more YAML file that's right down here, config.yaml. All that does is give you the title. So again, in the sidebar, that's what you see up here is this title. That's the only reason for that, that one file. So that's how you tie it all together. We have, and there's another reference we'll provide, which is a template that you can use that have these basic building blocks for a Jupyter book already laid out in a template. And we're going to use that in order to create a brand new notebook project, but we use that as a starting point so you don't have to handcraft the table of contents, the README file, etc. And we'll do this in the context of using a GitHub. GitHub it's free, incredibly powerful. Why would you want to use it? Well, of course, source code control is first and foremost, but you could just use Git, right, on your local system and get source control. But this is a way you could also share it with other people, and you can have that audience as broad or as narrow as you like. It could be your own work group. You're collaborating with a couple of other developers, perhaps either in or outside of your organization, or you might want to share it with the whole world. Not a problem with that, and you may find like-minded people who actually contribute to your project. There's a lot of really good reasons for using a GitHub integration, and Azure Data Studio does make that very easy. So we're going to start by creating a GitHub repository, and then we're going to take an Azure Data Studio project, and then we're going to link them all together here in Azure Data Studio. We'll start with using the template. And if you go to GitHub, and you'll get a link to my GitHub site. And what you'll see is this notebook template. So this is under Gym-BI tracks, and it's called notebook template. And this is actually described in our book. Oh, by the way, in the email that you'll get, you'll find out how to get a free copy of our book, Hands-on Azure Data Studio. This is described within the book. So what I'm going to do is from this site, Gym-BI tracks, ADS notebook template, I'm going to go to the code and I'm going to download the zip file, and that's going to give me the YAML, the README, etc. So I'll go ahead and download that, and then what I'll do is I'll put that in a folder, and I'm going to rename this let's call it webinar demo. All right, now we'll get the folder view of this, and you can see it's all the same information. What I'll do now is I'll open this up from Azure Data Studio, and the way that I'll do that is I'll go ahead and say File, Open Folder, and I'm going to go to the demo, Webinar Demo. And now we have the contents, and you can see it's just a bare bones outline. There's one notebook in here. If we look at the folder, we have our table of contents, right? It's just a generic welcome. We have under content, we have a README, bare bones, and then we have a SQL notebook, which just has a single query in it. Here's that config.yaml that says the only thing is, what is this called in the notebook heading, ADS notebook template. So all the pieces are here. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a GitHub repo, and we're going to link these two together, this content with the repo. So let's go ahead and we'll go into GitHub. I'm going to create a new repository, and I'm going to call this our demo. I'm going to make it public. I don't need to add a description. It'll add a README for me, or add the README for automatically. You'll see. Actually, we'll have in 2 cases we'll get the README. So I'll go ahead and create that. Now, what it'll do is give you the handy script. So assuming you have Git installed on your laptop or desktop, it'll invoke the runtime. If there's no README, then it'll add a very simple one. Otherwise, it'll append to it. So you'll have a README. It'll commit it, and it'll map it back to this GitHub repo that we just created. So I'm just going to pick this up, put it on my clipboard, go into Azure Data Studio. I'm going to go to view the terminal. And it could be command prompt. This happens to be PowerShell Core. Doesn't matter. I'm going to right click, and all those commands will now go in. Except for the last one, I'll hit enter. And now I have linked together this template that I just downloaded, unzipped, and put in a folder. Went into Azure, or went to a GitHub, created a repo, ran the script, and now we're done. If you go to the GitHub source control, you can see that all these are currently untracked. I can add these. I'm going to simply say update, hold the control key down and hit enter, and now it will auto commit. Down here, you'll see that you can synchronize the changes, because if you look at GitHub now, it won't have that. GitHub, if we go to this webinar demo, there's not much there, right? Just that one README. But now that from Azure Data Studio, I'm going to sync these changes. That's going to push it up into GitHub. Now that it's public, anybody can see this. You could share the link with friends or whoever you'd like to collaborate with. I'm going to refresh this, and now you can see, there we go. There's the data, there's my table of contents. And there's that one README file, the one notebook. So it's all there, and it's linked. So not only will it protect my source code, but I can make a change to any of these documents. I can go in and make a change to the notebook, whatever that change happens to be. When I save this, now GitHub says, okay, there's a change. You do want to sync that. This one was modified. So you're all set. All right. I was going to get into variables, but this would be a good time to stop to see if there's any questions. If not, I will get into the variables. We'll have just enough time to squeak that.
Hey, Jim,
Yes.
we did have one question back to your links and images section, asking if you can create a link to a place in the same notebook.
Yes, absolutely. Let me go back to what we had open just a minute ago, and we'll open up the outline, and you can see that this markdown cheat sheet is linked back to the same folder. And the link is not that bad, actually. If I go in, we can take a closer look at what that link looks like. It is simply markdown _ cheat sheet .ipynb. And that is right here, Markdown, cheat sheet, IPYNB. So it can be internal and it can be external. Good question. Okay. The last thing I wanted to talk about was the variables. And I'm going to start not with SQL, I'm going to start with Python and PowerShell. If I go to a Python notebook, and here's an example, I have two code cells. The first code cell, I'm referencing two values, A and B, assigning values to them. And then in a second code shell or cell, I'm going to reference those two variables. Now I can run these independently by clicking on the arrow, or I have a run all option. You can see the kernel is Python. So let's go ahead and run this, and boom, it shows us that it's 0.5, or if we divide 1 by 2. So that's easy. Oops, let's say that. Let's go into PowerShell. You see the same type of thing. Here in PowerShell, I'm assigning a PowerShell variable called version, and then I'm going to reference it in another cell. So let me go ahead and I'll do the run all. And so we have the version 5.1, and then a second code cell can reference it directly, and you can see it's 5.1. Okay, when you get to SQL, it's not quite so cut and dry. In SQL, you can have code blocks, but the variables do not carry over. So let me do this. Let me say we'll declare @name equals Jim. Okay, and so that should work fine. I'll run that against. Oh, I have to give it a type. Her 20. Okay, so you can run that. Now let me try to reference. Let me print name. Doesn't like it. So what happens if you're in PowerShell, there's no problem. I can go one to another and reference a variable that was defined and set earlier. Python, PowerShell, no problem. SQL, you cannot do that. So I have an example of one way to work around that, and that's using this snippet. Now again, actually there's 3 snippets here. One is to define a temp table to hold these, and then 2 other ones, one to set, one to get variable names. And so I can show you this real quickly. You reference it, and by the way, for those of you, I think I showed this in an earlier one, but to set the snippet values, you hit F1, go to preferences, user snippets, and you just paste it in right there. Yeah, there's lots of videos, I think, on how to do that, but there's 3 I'm going to use here. Create the table, get, set and get is what I'm going to use here. All right, so let's very quickly, because I know we're running out of time here, I'm going to use the create runtime values table, and that's a snippet. It's just going to pop up, and I can run this, and now I've actually created a table that we can use, and this temp table can be viewed in other cells. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do, I'll set a value. So let me say set run value. Notice it's highlighted. The variable, I'm going to call the variable name, and I'm going to say this is Jim. Okay, I can run that. All right, so now that's set. I'm in another cell now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get the run value, and I'm going to get the value called name. You can see how that changes in all 3 locations. I can run that, and okay, it worked, but I have to print it out. So let me print @name. Do that again, and boom, there it is. So that's a workaround. The code for this, there are 3 snippets, and all you have to do again is get a copy of this, put it in your preferences, type that in, and that's one way, one workaround for variables in SQL Server to share them from cell to cell. we're 1 minute over, so I do very much appreciate your attendance. Again, you can download this presentation on this link. If you want a free copy of our book, Hands-on Azure Data Studio, and you'll get this in your email, just contact Connor. We have lots of videos on YouTube. There's a link to that as well, and you can discover our products, our ELT, ETL products, BIMLSAT, ELT Snap on that link. So again, thanks so much for attending, and hope to see you again soon.